There are hundreds of videos that haven't been launched on YouTube on Patreon. Make sure you guys join the Patreon to help us grow. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Eric Lambert. Early Mormonism, Joseph Smith. We have David Fitzgerald here, author of The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons. Get the book, guys. Make sure you guys check it out. For sure. It's a fun, interesting book. He likes to highlight some of the obvious, really, how do I put this? It's kind of an airplane view, but there's sometimes you magnify in on great details. And I think some important stuff that is evidence that this is BS. Okay. And that's pretty much David's angle is you want to find the most obnoxious, crazy, obvious stuff to say this is a BS thing. You want to definitely check out this book. He also has a Patreon you guys can join. Be participants in that. Go ahead and help him grow it. I hope you do. And then we have Bryce Blankenagel. He is the host of Naked Mormonism Podcast. Kind of tired of mentioning that you're naked at this point. It's duh. Don't you know this?
I never get tired of being naked. So
yeah,
that's on you, man. That's on you.
He's trying to live the Garden of Eden days and not think that he is naked, but he wants you to know it.
Thinking about moving back to Jackson County, Missouri.
Exactly. Make sure you guys go check out his Patreon right now. You can join it for free. And then when he starts to come back, it's only $1 per episode. And that's hours of content. But right now there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of content that you guys can access joining in there and checking it out. You want to really examine and zoom in with your microscope. This is the episode for you and the dynamics of the history of what was going on, exhaustively. That's what you do with Bryce. Make sure you guys check it out because I'm fascinated with this stuff. These shows have been great. The last episode, you guys exposed him the Book of Abraham, and these people are conning the con artist at this point.
Player getting played. That's right.
Literally true. Literally true. Yep.
What happens from here? I mean, we spent some time on that. We talked about Porter Rockwell. Things are back in order. He's now in charge of people getting drunk. They create a little separate place. Everyone's having fun. And it seems like things are going good for the prophet and his religion. And even though he's getting played left and right with little funny, but none of that's stopping him. He is a freight train who runs right through it all and keeps going.
But the end of the tracks isn't that far off either. This is 1843, 1844, and the clock is ticking on old Joseph.
Yeah, and there are individual stories that we can pull out, like we did with last episode and the Psalter and the Kinderhook plates and stuff, and they're funny. And there are times, there are periods of Mormon history that are kind of eras of good feeling where the scandals cool off for a little while, and things are just business is going about as usual, and things are good and cool and all right. But the entire year of 1844 is marked by scandal after scandal after scandal, to the point that Joe can no longer control the scandals. That all of the stuff that he's been running from for years all begins to catch up. And he begins also, in order to continue to run from these, he continues to increase his aspirations and his goals, and he continues to try and elevate himself to higher and higher levels in order to escape all of the things that he's responsible for. And this is a pretty common theme in this guy's life, right? When he's responsible, when his responsibilities come up, he runs. He runs from problems. He runs from responsibilities, whether that's the multiple exoduses that he led the Mormons through, whether that's surrendering in the face of inevitable defeat, whether that's, the births of his children. He decides to leave town when Emma's giving birth every single time. Whether it's land deeds and people asking him, hey, where's that check? Where's the money that you owe me? And him attacking the postal service because he's saying that Sidney Rigdon is holding his letters and that, he's not getting noticed that these people are trying to collect on the debts. He just continues to try and run and continues to try and expand. And it's very clear that Joseph Smith understands at this point that if he is able to build up his empire enough and to make himself untouchable enough, that he's never going to be held accountable or responsible for anything. And that is a dangerous path. That path only has a couple of possible conclusions.
That's right.
And that is tyranny or death. That there isn't really a middle ground because there's no de-escalation factor. It's only more and more escalation and this increasing feedback loop of danger and damage and totalitarian rule. And that's a very scary path to find oneself on. And it's even more scary to watch people walk that path because there's no reining it in. There's no stopping them. Like these people clearly proved to hundreds of Mormons that were standing in front of them that Joseph Smith is a fraud and the dude is bulletproof. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Add into that, Nauvoo is getting dangerously large as well. We have a lot of that is we give thanks to Brigham Young for, right? Because Brigham Young and the apostles had gone to Europe and they established the immigration fund, which allowed people to charter a ship and get from Europe to Nauvoo for the sum total of four British pounds. And by early 1844, the number of immigrants who would come in from Europe was somewhere around 5,000 to 8,000 people. Wow. It's a lot of people that Brigham Young was able to get to join the church, to get baptized, and to get coordinated to cross the ocean and to get to Nauvoo and to bring any money, any provisions that they can, any expertise that they can, and anything that they could bring to help build up the Mormons. Brigham Young was responsible for getting those people there. And it should be noted that these people trusted Brigham Young a lot more than they trusted most of the other Mormon leadership. Brigham Young, as president of the Quorum of Apostles, put up this front of organization. Everything is cool. We are a new dispensation. We are a biblical Christianity with a little extra addendum to it. We are just a little extra. That's all. Brigham Young was the united front that was very appealing to Europeans who were caught up in the system of industrialization in large swaths of Europe and who were being left behind and who wanted to go back to a more agrarian lifestyle. Nauvoo and America offered that to these people and they wanted it. So they came over in droves and Brigham Young was able to sell that package to them. And they saw him as the stable guy that they could rally behind, that they could follow.
Mm.
He was like the anti-Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was the flashy guy with a smile who would tell you these great stories. Brigham Young was none of that. He was just a square slab of a dude who was just work hard and make it happen and just do it by the numbers and solid as a rock.
Yeah, and every movement needs somebody like that to be second in command or to be close to the person who's, the charisma brings the people in, the organization keeps them there. Brigham Young was the second part of that equation. And he continues to grow in power and influence in the Mormon community as more and more of these Europeans immigrate to Nauvoo. And in early 1844, this is huge. And Nauvoo, by this time, Nauvoo itself is something like 15,000 people. Chicago was like 3,000 people at this time. Nauvoo is massive, a massive, massive city, truly remarkably large. Now, Nauvoo today, most of the city of Nauvoo is owned by the Mormon Church, right? Because there's this guy who in the early 1900s went about, purchased a ton of land of these old Mormon artifact lands. And this is what they were building. This is what they were creating. This is the Nauvoo Temple. And this is a picture that I personally took. This is in Nauvoo. They have reconstructed this temple because it had never truly completed construction. And it was struck by a number of natural disasters as well as arson, and eventually the whole thing crumbled. They recreated this and dedicated it in the year 2000.
Wow.
And Nauvoo itself, the city of Nauvoo now, is just a Mormon tourist attraction. Let me find a better picture of actual Nauvoo. Yeah, there's the temple, right? It's a remarkably large building. And Nauvoo itself it's a small farming town, but in 1844, this place was massive, right? Well, I was pretty excited to get into Nauvoo. What can I say? I was like, I'm finally here. But so there's all of these artifacts and all these cool things in Nauvoo now, all owned by the church.
And those two on the horseback, the statue, that's Joseph and Hiram, isn't it?
That is correct. Yeah, and this is called the Last Ride of the Prophet, or the Prophet's Last Ride. Yep. And we'll be getting to that pretty soon.
Oh, yeah.
If we remember our last public address of the Prophet Joseph Smith, him on the stand with his sword drawn, and the people and the crowds and the constables and the legionnaires, right? Like, we're getting close to realizing that portrait, that picture will soon be a reality for us. And this is his last ride right after he gave that speech. But yeah, so Nauvoo itself is a beautiful city now, owned largely by the church. And they have this museum here that retains a number of artifacts from Nauvoo that begin to show the grandeur of this place. And this shows the westward journey after Nauvoo fell. But they have, this is a voting box that they had there. And when I posted this on my Naked Mormonism social media, someone commented like the most worthless artifact in Nauvoo because voting wasn't a democracy, right? Here's Joseph Smith's Nauvoo Legionnaire sword here at the museum. This is Willard Richards' sword, not Joseph Smith's. And here some of the larger figures in early Mormon history. This guy, Orson Spencer, we'll talk about him really soon. But this guy catalyzed somebody pulling a pistol on Joseph Smith and almost shooting him in the middle of the street. And Porter Rockwell knocked the gun out of the guy's hand. So Nauvoo has tons of cool stuff. It's just a really cool city. And it was reaching its height in early 1844 with this, 15,000 people, controlling a ton of political power. The Masonic Lodge in Nauvoo was ascending more men to be Master Masons than any other lodge in America at the time. So the number of powerful Masons in Nauvoo was also growing and expanding.
Well, at the same time, the rest of Freemasonry was very pissed off at this very thing.
That's very true. And right, I also want to say, this occurred to me at one point when I was just thinking back on the recordings that we've done. I don't want people to be like, oh, Joseph Smith was a Mason, and see that what we're talking about is going to be like Illuminati conspiracy, Freemasonry controls the world, reptilian overlords, Anunnaki. That's not where we're going. That's not what we're talking about. The ties between Masonry and Mormonism are long and well studied and well discussed and well described. The influences of Masonry on early Mormonism, the episodes that I did on it, or the first episode I did on it, I called them inextricably tied, because they really are. A lot of Joseph Smith's practices, early practice, come from the Masonic initiation ritual. He had intertwinings with Masonry his entire life, his entire ministry, and he was also, one of his wives was one of the largest anti-Mason celebrities in America at the time. So there are a lot of connections between the two organizations. And that's because Joseph Smith was a plagiarist in every possible way. And he liked Masonry.
This was just one more mythology that he wove into his tapestry of lies.
Yeah. And one of the main things that was appealing about Masonry was the secrecy of it, right? And Joseph Smith himself said at one point that the secret to Masonry is keeping a secret. So when you're doing initiation rites where you're mimicking slitting your own throat and disemboweling yourself, if you reveal the secrets of the initiation, that obviously comes with all sorts of insulating practices and beliefs that can be very useful to a warlord like Joseph Smith.
Especially when you're willing to back it up with actual action and actual slitting of throat.
Exactly. And he just happened to have assassin squads who were willing to do exactly that. So the Masonry in general is very appealing to Joseph Smith. And he also got kind of steeped in the arguments at the time of like spiritual Masonry versus spurious Masonry and practical versus spiritual. And, people claim that the Book of Mormon itself is an anti-Masonic text. There are some anti-Masonic sentiments in it, but it was more anti-spurious Masonry, while championing practical or spiritual Masonry. So like there's a long and storied tradition of these two organizations being commingled, which is all of that is to say, when we talk about Masonry and Mormonism, please don't think that we're like falling down the rabbit hole of reptilian overlords. That's not what we're talking about.
This is more like just comparing the Jews and the early Christians to each other. It's like they have this love-hate relationship because they came out of each other. You know,
right.
Good point. Good point.
And also, I'll note that like the early church leaders very clearly recognized that the endowment ritual was very similar to the Masonic initiation. Heber Kimball, for example, called the endowment celestial masonry. So like in the early years when this was introduced by Joseph Smith, it was well understood that Masonry had a lot of the mysteries of the universe, but that the endowment, the Mormon ritual, just perfected what was lost since Solomon's Temple.
Because the common thought was this Masonry, even though it came out of the 16th century, 17th century, their own mythology said, no, this came out of this Temple of Solomon, goes back thousands of years. Complete bullshit. Yep. But nonetheless, that was their official story. And so for Mormons, the fact that there was overlap didn't bother them at all, because they were actually taking the real Solomon Temple rituals and perfecting it, as you say. They were giving you the straight dope that the Masons only have like a shadow of, a counterfeit of.
And what's really remarkable in this too is how quick people are to lose institutional knowledge, because that first generation of Mormons were all dead by the early 1900s. And by that time, the ties between Masonry and Mormonism had basically been culturally forgotten. And it wasn't until the 1960s that a scholar wrote an article and presented it at BYU that was a groundbreaking article illustrating the similarities between Masonry and Mormonism, that the concept of those two organizations being tied together re-entered the consciousness of Mormon academic scholarship. So in just the span of 50 to 60 years, that information was lost to an entire culture, and it had to be reintroduced by an academic who was later excommunicated.
Yeah. Won't be the last of that time that happens either.
Yeah, I'm sure that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Actually,
okay.
It's funny. It's funny because 1960s, 1980s, there are things that we learned about Mormonism that came out of their own archives, their own historical museums, that just blow it wide open. And
we have Leonard Arrington to thank for a lot of that. Leonard Arrington was the last official church historian who occupied the office of church historian. They abolished it after his tenure was up. But he basically hired a reasonably large team of historians to help document and archive everything in the church catalog and archives. And he opened up the vaults to the researchers, and that was the birth of what came to be known as New Mormon history. He and Richard Bushman catalyzed this idea of New Mormon history that was then shut down by Boyd K. Packer and a few apostles. And this is all very recent in Mormon history. And Leonard Arrington's diaries talk about the infighting between his office and his group of historians and the apostles who were trying to squash that information, keep it from going out. Anyway.
Won't be the last time that happens either.
Lots of rabbit holes. Anyway. So to get back into 1844, right? We're going to do our best to try and navigate back into this. 1844, Joseph Smith was powerful and dangerous and massively wealthy, also massively in debt. A lot of people were wanting him. A lot of creditors wanted him. The whole state of Missouri wanted to bring him back and make him see some form of justice, vigilante or otherwise. There were a lot of people who wanted an ill fate for Joseph Smith. And that includes people within his own inner circle. Because as discussed before, there were these competing factions in the church. There were the pro-polygamy secret group, secret combinations, one might say, of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and Heber Kimball and William Clayton. And these leaders are all on the pro-polygamy side. And then there's the anti-polygamy side that's largely led by the Laws, the Fosters, and the Higbees. These three, this three sets of brothers are leading the anti-polygamous charge. And also coming into contact with information that polygamy is far more vast and well known than they originally suspected. They thought it was all rumors, but now Joseph Smith is presenting to the High Council the polygamy revelation, and there's a lot of infighting that's going on.
And again, before this, it's complete top secret. Only the upper leaders know about this. Everybody else is just hears rumors and sees what they see. But officially on paper, in sermons, there's no such thing.
No such, no. And especially, for print outside of Nauvoo, the Mormons were working tirelessly to spread the propaganda that they were a monogamous religion, which was futile at best.
And when news broke out, when the weight of rumor just collapsed, and they did make public announcements, it was a huge egg on the face for the church and on Brigham Young. And they lost thousands of new converts who just said, "Oh yeah, we're not going. We're out."
They also gained a lot of converts who were like, "Oh, polygamy, totally, yeah, cool, let's do it. Yeah, let's go to Mexico, everybody." So there are a lot of these forces that are coming into play. Also, Joseph Smith begins to heavily leverage one of his buddies as a ghostwriter. And this guy is Phelps, William Wines Phelps, W.W. Phelps. He has long time been one of Joseph's scribes and ghostwriters, but this guy begins taking on the establishment of politics under the name of Joseph Smith in public print. So there are these endless tirades about the death of the Whig Party and how the Democrats are not actually good, and how we should absorb Texas and Oregon, and we should aggressively expand American expansion campaign. And these are all written by Phelps himself, but they're all given the name of Joseph Smith and published in the Times and Seasons. And then a few times Phelps even takes on specific politicians like Henry Clay and James Calhoun, and these national well-known politicians, some of which are the second generation after the founding fathers. Most of them are. Joseph Smith's name starts to appear in print in tirades against these politicians. Now, Thomas Sharp of the Warsaw Signal, right, the founder of the anti-Mormon party, the guy who's been the watchdog on the tower, the guy who saw the military parade and was like, "Oh crap, the Mormons are a huge problem." This guy, he's responding to each and every one of these tirades. And in almost all of them, he says, when will Joseph Smith just throw his name into the presidential pool to run for POTUS? And says it over and over. And finally, in February 1844, Joseph says, "I am running for president." He descends down.
Let's pause for a moment. Joseph Smith says, "I am running for president." And picture that alternative history for a moment.
He walks down the golden gilded steps of the Nauvoo mansion, and surrounded by a huge house party, and that's not too far off of how it happened. But he does announce, "I'm running for president."
Snazzy uniform, sword on his side. Yep,
that's right.
This
he's
is
looking like $1 million.
It's kind of like The Rock, talking about he's running for president. It's like, what? Or even better, what's his name? The rapper that just was talking about Kanye. Yeah. They both have mental problems too. So it's like, okay, interesting. Oh man.
Yeah. But if you think about it, though, the office of president of the United States, especially after Andrew Jackson had just left, two sessions ago, it was so appealing for a narcissistic sociopath like Joseph Smith, and the presidential pardon power. One way, if you are able to keep all of these creditors and all of these people who have criminal convictions against you at bay for long enough for yourself to become president, and then you just pardon yourself after 4 or 8 years, all of those problems go away, right? That's the ultimate I win. You get elected president, right?
Yeah. I say nothing. I say nothing. Yeah.
It's hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, right?
It's just amazing how different things were back then. Is all I can say. That's just the different world. Yeah.
But so there are a few angles to consider when we're talking about Joseph Smith's presidential campaign, right? And when he did announce, like, the nationwide print caught fire, everybody's announcing, oh, the Mormon prophet, the Mormon Moses is running for president. Everybody's losing their mind. So Phelps writes a presidential pamphlet that lays out Joseph Smith's campaign. A lot of it is non-committal. A lot of it dances the party lines between Whigs and Democrats at the time. And a lot of it is really, it's not that consequential. It's a really boring pamphlet. I read through the whole thing on my podcast, and just went through, like, the general arguments that were at the time. But what it did advocate for were two prongs. One was aggressive expansion. It wanted to annex Texas and Oregon, and to incorporate all of the Mexico territory down into California as part of the United States. Yeah. Which eventually all that did come to fruition, right? So it did advocate for aggressive expansionism, and it also advocated for the abolition of slavery, which is really interesting. The specific program that Phelps laid out for Joseph Smith's campaign was basically a slave buyback system, where the government would pay slave owners and basically purchase the slaves at market value from the slave owners and then allow them to go free. But also it would probably incorporate rental policy, like we did with Mexican immigrants in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So all of that is to say that there were some things in it that were progressive. Some of them were regressive, but it was something that spoke to a lot of sensibilities and what a lot of people wanted at the time. Yeah. So it was a relatively appealing presidential ticket. And Joe begins attacking other candidates, his opponents, his political opponents, in public print constantly.
Jeez.
I just want to say one little point. I even hate to bring it up, but the fact of that he was taking these two the main political parties of the day and taking the best of what they were both saying. Somebody else did that in Berlin in the 30s. So that another thing's coming right out of Hitler's playbook.
Right. And he wanted to form his own party, right? He wasn't going to run as a Whig or a Democrat. He was forming his own party, which the Democrat Party had been formed by Andrew Jackson, who did that same thing, right? Who took the elements of the Federalist Party and of the Republican Party and was like, I kind of want my own party. And he became the jackass, right? He became the stubborn jackass party of the Southern slave-owning Democrats. So, like, that's what happens. That's how populist movements work. And Joseph Smith was seating himself atop this populist movement and was hoping that he had enough momentum as the Mormon prophet and from all of the press from the 1838 Mormon War that spread his name across national newspaper syndicates. He wanted to capitalize on that. He hoped that he had enough momentum to carry him into the White House.
And then it's United States of Mormonism.
That's exactly what I want to say, right? So that there are a few angles to consider, right? Because world domination was Joseph Smith's end goal. He was going to do whatever he needed to achieve that, right? And a lot of historians will claim that this was purely a protest ticket, that the Mormons were sick of the Democrats and of the Whigs from their whole fiasco in Missouri, from the way that they were treated by the governor of Illinois, and from everything that had gone on. That Joseph Smith only ran as a protest candidate and that it was just symbolic, that he didn't actually want to do it. That's not true. He wanted to be president. What he was going to do with his office is a matter of speculation. And there are a few ways to look at this. World domination was on his mind. The best way that Joseph Smith could think to do that was to cobble together the oppressed Native Americans and the freed slaves, and carry war across the southern states and free the rest of the slaves, and then take that war to the White House and conquer it. If he could just get elected to president, he could surpass that whole war thing and just become the most powerful man on earth. And he wanted to do that. If he could do that without himself being in danger, he was going to do that. But if he were rejected, if he didn't win the presidency, then all of the options, he would gain so much notoriety, nationwide notoriety, that he could then use his rejection, his loss of the presidential candidate, to catalyze more people as the protest movement, as the populist protest movement against the government, and then catalyze that war. And once America was taken over, once it was the United States of Mormonism,
what if history?
Yeah, well, see, like that's a good point. That's a good question. Like, what does this actually look like once Joseph Smith gets elected to president, or he retains the presidency, or he acquires it by war? It doesn't stop at the boundaries of America. He's building Zion, the new Jerusalem, to be built upon the American continent, to begin to rule the world as Jesus's theocracy, right? He is putting in the human work necessary to begin the second coming.
To be the Mormon Muhammad. Yeah.
Oh, truly. My gosh.
So there were a couple of things that needed to be put into order in order for this to happen. And a few things, one of which was getting a vice president. He wanted a few people to run for his vice president, and he sent off multiple letters, and everybody's like, no, I'm not interested, bro. Sorry. One he sent to James Gordon Bennett, but found out that guy was actually born in Ireland, so therefore wasn't, a worthy candidate. But then later found out, after he had sent the retraction letter of like, oh, we offered you the vice president, but you found out you're actually born in Ireland, so you can't run, so never mind. But it turns out that he actually was born in America, that he was a viable candidate, but they didn't send a second retraction of the retraction, so he didn't get it. So there was a constant battle throughout February, March, and April 1844 of who's going to be the VP. And nobody wants the job because Joe he's not a good guy. And people know that he's not a good guy. And that they see that his campaign is doomed. He's not a fully viable candidate. Yeah. And because of all of the previous criminal convictions weighing over his head, who knows what that's actually going to look like.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he also does use the Missouri persecution, and this is a mainstay of his life. He uses the Missouri persecution from the Missouri Mormon War as the catalyzer to get his people more rallied up. So multiple times he prints in the Times and Seasons, or Phelps prints for him with his name on it, veiled threats to Missouri that the Mormon conquest is going to begin in the state of Missouri. So obviously the Missouri citizens are like, we got to do everything possible to make sure he's not a viable candidate. And they're trying to organize militias that can rally behind the Illinois militia when they eventually storm Nauvoo and go and arrest Joseph Smith. So there's a lot of anti-Joseph Smith sentiment going on in the nearby cities and in Missouri and in Iowa. And there are a lot of people that really hate this guy and think that he should rot in prison or be sent to the gallows.
Civil War could have started 20 years earlier.
Yeah. That's scary. That right? Like he had the constituent pieces to start the Civil War.
Yeah.
He didn't actually implement them, but he had the ingredients to start the Civil War in the 1840s instead of the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jeez, dude. I mean, and how many people are rallying on his side at this point? Like thousands, tens?
Well,
or a couple, at least 10 maybe?
Outside the church, not so much. That's the thing.
It depends on who you ask, though, right? So the Mormons themselves claimed at this time that they had 300,000 members worldwide. That number is way bonkers outside of possibility, but that's what they claimed. Gotcha. And it's one of those things that, like, all you need to have a boy band is just a group of screaming girls. And then you like it just feedbacks and you get more of them and you become the boy band. Right. So it's the simple claim that there are 300,000 Mormons goes a long way to leveraging more people to join, more people looking into it, more people like, who's this Joseph Smith guy, and joining up, even though it's a lie, it's a fabrication.
We're the fastest growing religion in America, in the world.
And they still say that to this day.
Still say it.
Still say. I grew up with that rhetoric. I grew up saying that rhetoric, not knowing that it was a lie, right?
And so it's a super huge lie. It is. They are nowhere near the fastest at all.
Nowhere near. They're. I mean, they're top 10, but that's. I mean, even that is like religion across the world is declining everywhere. Yeah. So
and if they weren't having his babies as fast as they would, their numbers wouldn't even be as high as that.
Right. Yeah. The Mormon childbirth rate is almost double the American standard childbirth rate. Like Mormons have big families. That's borne out in the population statistics themselves. So in all this, right? So like a few more pieces need to fall into place. Joseph Smith needs to organize his people in Nauvoo that he knows he can trust the very most. And he's created these expanding circles of groups of the leadership that he can trust, with the second anointed or the anointed quorum, with those who are endowed, with those that he teaches about polygamy, right? So he's expanding this, but he wants to consolidate by making yet another layer of the pyramid up on top that is going to be his closest followers, his most trusted acolytes, and also cut out all of the non-polygamists, all of the anti-polygamists from all of this, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So he's going to make it even harder. I mean, well, obviously they are not complying with him. It appears that there's a rift that they cannot mend with this polygamy.
Yeah. Right.
Which is what caused thousands of people to leave too, once they came out. So
that is true. It was a wedge issue during the schism crisis primarily. That really came to the front during the schism crisis. So Joseph wants to insulate and protect himself from the no men and surround himself by the yes men, and also to make sure that he is able to capably and effectively minimize the influence of the anti-polygamists. So once again, the anti-polygamists, the Fosters, the Higbees, and the Laws, these groups of brothers, they all have a long history with Joseph Smith. They all are converts, pretty early converts. They all were in Nauvoo, all in leadership positions of the church. But all of them had come under the scorn of Joseph Smith for one reason or another. Now with the Higbees, it's because they thought that Joe had their dad killed. And they brought up those accusations, and then Joe summarily attacked their characters and was able to successfully brand one of them as a rapist, and it just completely destroyed his character. That's Chauncey Higbee. And then the Fosters, Joseph Smith was getting on Robert Foster's case for not building the mansion fast enough, but then they came to learn about the polygamy that was going on, and the Foster brothers confronted Joseph Smith, like, what is going on here? And he's like, no, it's totally not going on. But they had incontrovertible evidence, and they
building bedroom after bedroom for women.
Yes, exactly. And not just bedroom after bedroom, but a stowaway room underneath the stairs in the Nauvoo mansion too.
Wow.
A little hideaway cabin for him and whoever happens to go under the stairs with him. And then the Laws, right? Joseph Smith wanted Jane Law, who was William's wife, and Emma wanted William as a spiritual husband. And the whole relationship, whatever happened there, soured and it went south. And then the Laws were mad about this. Joseph Smith also wanted, there's some dispute about this, but Joseph Smith also wanted like one of their daughters or something. Ooh. And at that point, Wilson Law actually drew a pistol on Joseph Smith in the Nauvoo mansion. And William was able to stop his brother from shooting the prophet right there on the spot. So these tensions are boiling up in Nauvoo. There is fractional division among the leadership.
And I want to make one thing that blows my mind, but very clear. These guys don't hate Joseph Smith. They don't think he's a false prophet. They think he's a fallen prophet, a true prophet of God who is fallen. But that's how deep this goes, that even though all this stuff's happening, even though they're opposing him, they still think that God's for him.
Go back a sentence. They
still think that.
They still think that Mormonism is true and that God speaks through him.
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you guys, but I mean, wow. That is fascinating. Just shows how powerful these type of things are. A charismatic leader, like you mentioned, Hitler, just to use a perfect example. Look at how many people followed him. And then even when they wanted to back out, they couldn't.
Yeah. There comes a point where they can do no wrong because, it's like these false doomsday prophets. The Jehovah's Witnesses and the Millerites, they make this claim that, it's all going to happen on such and such a day. Day comes and gone, and things are still here. And yet the people who stick around, they'll lose people over that, but most of them will double down and keep going.
Yeah. And it's remarkable too that, even after Joe died in the schism crisis, like most of the people bounced around to different factions of Mormonism.
Yeah.
They didn't go off and become Lutherans or whatever. They bounced around to the Stringites and the Bickertonites and the different the Cutlerites.
There's like 200 splinter groups now. By now.
Yeah. And like most of those are also familial descent too, of like the same people who split off in the original schism crisis. It's really remarkable, and various fractures. I mean, it's a huge bush, right? Of fracture. But
it's fascinating to see the trajectory of this, because like it starts out improbably enough as this weird little bullshit story, becomes this old con artist, becomes this thing, becomes a thing, becomes an organization, and it grows. You don't put it back in the box. It's going to spin out of control. It's going to take over the country and become king of the world, but it's not going to just stop. There's a impetus all its own. And we're watching it reach the maximum point where it's just spinning breakneck speed, and something's going to happen. Something
has to break. It's got you can only push these rules so much. You can only push humans into their sunk cost fallacy for so long before they finally rise up and do something about it.
Good point.
Right. So in all of this, right, so the dissent is growing larger. Foster Higby's laws. There's also one more character in all of this he was one of the public figures of Nauvoo for the people. He was the president of the High Council. His name is William Marks. Now, I bring that name up because he is somebody who was really, really important and became a very important figure in the RLDS church that was led by Joseph's son. But William Marks he was one of those, once again, one of the stable figures that had a public face of stability that was very appealing to the people when they saw the leadership spiraling out of control. This is one of the guys who could be an adult in the room and could keep his head on straight about it. So William Marks is this guy. And during he played a huge role in the schism crisis in giving his voice of approval to Sidney Rigdon. And it's a huge mess. But anyway, so Joseph Smith begins to recognize these guys, these anti-polygamists, as primary detractors, his primary threats. And he holds multiple municipal hearings trying to charge these guys with bogus charges because it's not Joe's Nauvoo Municipal Court. He's able to fabricate witnesses. The witnesses will say whatever he wants. He tries to get his constables or his Nauvoo policemen, who are the Danites with a different name, to assassinate them in the middle of the night. And these guys present evidence that Joseph Smith tried to have them killed, and he's able to wash it all away. He has this huge faux thing that he brings all of the Nauvoo policemen into the courtroom and was like, hey, did I ask any of you to assassinate William Law? And all of them are like, no, we would never. No, we have never had a secret oath with you. What are you talking about?
Who would ever think of such a thing?
And it's just paper thin and hilarious. But also in Joe's public statements, he's talking about a Brutus or a Judas among the people. So he's putting the Mormons on edge, making them worried that there's somebody in the leadership ranks who's going to betray the prophet. Right. And he's using
fingers pointing everywhere.
Exactly, which makes everybody suspicious of their neighbors. Now, the people know who they are. The Brutus and the Judas know who they are, and that's William Law and William Marks. They're the Brutus and the Judas. So Foster Higby's Laws and then William Marks, those guys are our Judases, our Judas and our Brutus. And Joe is trying everything he can to discredit these guys, to get them vilified by the community, to try and break these people so that they will hopefully just leave him alone. They'll just leave the city, and he ends up icing them out because like these guys are all in high ranking leadership positions. They own a lot of property. They own businesses. He tells all the Mormons to not do any business with them. He tries to devalue their property. Like he does everything to try and break these people. And this goes through the entirety of early 1844. The whole year, he is constantly attacking these guys. At the same time that he creates...
Not the whole year. Not the whole year.
The whole first half. The whole first half, for sure. He didn't have a whole lot to say for the second half of 1844. So he's vilifying these figures, and many of these figures are trusted members of the community. At the same time that he's working behind the scenes to create a more insular group. And that allows us to finally introduce one of the most consequential documents or artifacts in Mormon history. And it is the minute book for the Council of 50.
Uh-oh.
Now, I want to screen share this because this is something that has been hidden away and closed to researchers for over a century and a half. This is the minute book for the Council of 50. And now it is available on the church's own josephsmithpapers.org. This is the church's owned archive. They have digitized this entire book, and you can read the original handwriting as well as the entire transcript of it. It's been all typed up. So this is the cover page of this notebook.
I have to say, it is astounding to me how much, look at that. Look at that. Wow. It's astounding to me how much smoking guns of early Mormon history you can hold in your own hands and look at with your own eyes still today. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, David, that was how long it takes for you to actually react. So that was like 25 seconds. So start from the beginning. It's astounding.
Right. Yeah, it's astounding to me how much of early Mormon history is still in our hands, and you can see it with your own eyes today.
Yep.
Look at that. I mean, that's just amazing to me. And it's all out in sight. It's in plain sight.
So for the intent of so the Council of 50 became this super duper hyper awesome secret insular group of Mormon theocrats, the people who it was their job to build the Mormon theocracy. Now, this is the title of the Council of 50. And this is the minute book, right? Record of the Council of 50 or Kingdom of God. This was Joseph Smith's governing body. He created in March of 1844 the Council of 50, which was to be the system of Mormon government that would replace the three pillars of government that we have in our Constitution of America.
Oh my gosh.
His Council of 50 truly was his own theocratic government.
Yeah. He literally was going to have control of whoever was in any office doing anything. Everything was his control.
Imagine all of America, one giant Utah, and Utah plus, because, I mean, yeah.
Well, Bryce, we've got 5 minutes, 6 minutes till the end of this episode. And I should have told you before this, but
this is perfect. No, this is perfect. Joseph Smith recognized how treasonous this book was. The guy who was responsible for keeping the minutes is William Clayton, right? And William Clayton was a longtime Joseph Smith sycophant supporter, scribe for Joseph Smith. William Clayton, his journal is one that is his Nauvoo journal is still locked up in church archives. They promise that they're going to publish it for 3 years now. They said back in 2017 they're going to publish the William Clayton Nauvoo journal. They still haven't done it because it's full of salacious details about him having a menage a trois with his different wives and his mother-in-law. And it's like it's full of all sorts of seedy details. But he had unprecedented, unparalleled access to the prophet. He was always right next to the prophet, always writing down what was going on. Always, as soon as he was done with his official capacity, he would go home every day and write in his own personal journal. This guy, William Clayton, is responsible for more Nauvoo documentation than just about any other single individual is. he was responsible for keeping the Council of 50 minutes. Every meeting that they had, he kept the record of the Council of 50. Joseph Smith knew how dangerous this book was. He knew that if he was caught with this in his possession, this is high treason. This is treason against the United States by somebody who was running for president of the United States. When Joseph Smith was carted off to Carthage jail, he told William Clayton, burn or bury the minutes. He knew that this would get him sent to the gallows. He knew this was treason. He told William Clayton to burn or bury the minutes. William Clayton buried them.
Damn.
And that's how we have it today.
How did they find it?
After Joe's death, William Clayton went and exhumed the records and then reconstructed them.
Wow. Guys, think about that. Think about that for a second. We mentioned it, but like really consider if he would have succeeded, and as manipulative as he was in all politics and the way that they were, if they would have somehow succeeded, what would America look like today?
Right.
Yeah. I will say, when I talked about this on Naked Mormonism, I did a 3-part series on the Council of 50 because it is that important. And even the members of it, they knew how secretive this needed to be, and they would use like nicknames and euphemisms for it. They would call it like the Council or the Council of God, or they would call it the Council of Yitfif because it's 50 backwards. So they use code names for it. Mormons are terrible with nicknames anyway. But when I did that 3-part series, the 3rd part of it, I wrote it from the perspective of a future Mormon theocratic dystopia.
Wow.
And I wrote it as basically cataloging the rest of Joseph Smith's life had he been successful with the Council of 50 and what he truly aimed at doing. And I recorded it, without even acknowledging that it was, fake history, it was speculative history. I just recorded it from that utopian perspective and documented the wars that they went burning across the nation and killing or enslaving all of the natives, and then burning across the South. And Brigham Young was general of the South and killed all of all of the slave owners and freed all of the slaves, and then went and burned their way all the way to Washington, D.C. and overtook the White House. And America is in this like dystopian future of like the Southern and the Western and the Eastern districts, kind of very, Hunger Games-ish kind of districts. It's interesting to play inside that speculative space because the foundations of this, the Council of 50, right? This influences world history. Yeah. But this shapes world history, not just American, but world history. And the Council of 50, like I should note, the Council of 50 never died. It just became more secretive. We have absolutely no evidence that the Council of 50 was ever dissolved or that they ever stopped having meetings. All we have is a few of the minute books that were kept in Nauvoo and in Utah. And then it just kind of disappears into thin air.
The science fiction writer in me just thinks this book writes itself. This book writes itself.
Yeah. Dang, guys, amazing. Close. What would you say to the audience? What do we have coming? What is coming up? David?
You know how we were saying it's going faster and faster and spinning apart? Well, guess what happens next week?
Yeah. Well, needless to say, Joseph Smith only has a few months to live. Let's make him good months.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we can zero in, guys. Maybe we can zero in a little because we're about to approach the end. The apocalypse is upon us.
Big time.
Well, tell us what you guys think down in the comment section. Make sure you guys go check out David's book, The Mormons, and go check out Naked Mormonism podcast with Bryce Blankenagel. This episode's, they won't be lasting forever. So you're going to need to follow these guys and help them in their endeavors. So don't forget to do that. That'll be down in your description of this video. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.
I have hundreds of videos on the Patreon. Become a patron and get early access to everything I ever launch. Join the Twitter. I've got a Discord chat room. You guys can help grow the community. One-time PayPal or Cash App if you want to help us out with a donation. And join our Facebook groups, man. Let's make this thing happen.